And we are live. Ricardo,
Hello,
how are you doing?
everyone. Pretty excellent. Pretty excellent.
Good, good. So today we're picking up where we left off last week with instructions on loving kindness. I'm sure people are going to pop in from last week and ask some specifics and questions about that. But you and I are planning to do group loving kindness in person uh, at a park
Hmm.
where that's going to be in the works. So
Yep.
for for loving kindness, what are the basics? Let's first discuss like the frame, like the main principles, and then we can get into the technique. What do you think is one of the most important, like foundational principles for loving kindness practice?
When we start to do the practice, I think having a if you've never done it before, if you have no idea what it is, just knowing that to be patient when you start to do the practice because a lot of the times you may not generate the feelings because an important aspect of it is it's not a mindfulness practice. It's more of a feeling practice, feeling love, feeling happiness. It's completely different than what most people are sort of taught in terms of mindfulness, right? And so having that notion that we're here to generate the sensations, and from the sensations we go into loving other people, loving ourselves, loving whatever we're trying to do. And so for me, I think I want that's the most important part of it when we come to loving kindness practices is the sensations of it. But and again, if you don't feel it, being patient and being calm with it, because a lot of us are going to struggle and like, oh, I don't feel it or I barely feel it, and that's all right too. And then eventually we go into other aspects to it. But I don't know about you. Like, what is your kind of view on love and kindness? What is the most important aspect of it when approaching the actual practice?
I think one of the really important things to understand about loving kindness is that it's taught differently in different places. So some traditions, some groups, they teach it as a generation, like
Mm.
something that you have to give rise to. And then other groups teach it as something that is inherent in the object that you start to sense and feel when you have in mind. So there's
Mm.
different ways of going about this. Like loving the heart practices, these are a pretty broad range of practices, and some of them are very similar. So for example, in pranic healing or Hatha yoga, Chokuk Soy, Master Chokuk Soy teaches the twin hearts meditation. That's very much uh, a loving kindness that begins to arise through the intentional sharing of blessings. So that's what allows a loving kindness to arise. Whereas in Theravada Buddhism, the loving kindness practices that have to do with a single object, like a person or a group of people, you're sensing the goodness in their hearts. And that's the proximate cause for the arising of the loving kindness, the feeling, the mind heart state of loving kindness. So
Mm.
it's really important to see that from the outset, this is taught differently in different places.
Mm-hmm. And this goes back to like everyone's definition of love is different. And like from the first episode, we covered that it's all of it. Love can be harsh. Love can be soft. Love can be very blunt. Love can be very subtle. Like some people think, oh, love is giving. Love is understanding. Love is it's just an array of things. And in terms of practice, it's the same way. Like it's almost like yeah, you're taking this practice, but the outcome is always going to be that unconditional love at the end of the road. So like you were saying, each practice is different.
Actually, Ricardo, could you continue to elaborate a bit on that, because I just remembered that on Facebook to make this public. instead of just for friends.
Oh yeah. And so like on the first episode we were discussing how if we define what like for each all the audience members define love in your own way. Like what is it? We all have a definition of it. But really love is everyone's definition and encompasses all of it. And so taking that approach or that sort of mindset into the practice, you'll start to see that and actually start to experience how love is all of that. And you can start to experience in your daily life and the way you approach a person, whether it's a business setting, whether that's relationship settings, you know, maybe sometimes you get into an argument, but instead of it being an argument, you're saying these things out of love now. It's no longer this programming or this influence or whatever that triggered the event. You're now in a space of love. So it comes off differently. Most of us on the outside looking at this event would think, oh my God, they're arguing, it's very negative. But we're not seeing the subtlety of this event, which is, oh, that person's actually spewing out love. And this is one of the sort of outcomes of the love and kindness practice. Like you as an individual begins to feel it. And you can start to actually spread it, really spread it to everyone that encounters you, which is pretty cool, I think. One story that I have is one of my teachers, he was at the airport and he was, you know, that baggage section where the people grab the baggage and put it onto that machine that takes it to the airplane. And the lady at the desk was very angry. It wasn't her day. And my teacher noticed this and he started to expand love and kindness to her. Most people would react, be like, oh God, what's her problem? Like she's kind of a, you know. But he did the opposite. He was like, okay, spread love and kindness to her. And her mood started to shift instantly. Just because it's so subtle, you know, you don't notice it, but she felt it. And obviously he's a teacher. He has much more power than me. And so the effect is different. So her mood changed and she was much more calm after that. So these are the results of love and kindness. So yeah.
The loving kindness that can come from a master or a guru is really just extremely cosmic. So in loving kindness and in this kind of heart practice, it's like an umbrella, like I was saying. There's so many different meditations that are all considered loving kindness. And even within a particular sect of Buddhism, for example, people are arguing over how exactly to do it. One of the frames that one of the ways of viewing loving kindness is that loving kindness also means benevolence. So the word in Pali for loving kindness is metta, metta. Very close to the word maitri in Sanskrit. And maitri is the word for friendliness, for benevolent. So in some suttas, loving kindness is translated or it's understood as the way that a mother would love a child or love their children. But some people say that that's not exactly what it means. It means that the kindness is referring to the benevolence that the mother has for the child, not necessarily the that same kind of love that can come with a bit of possessiveness. This loving kindness is really referring to the unconditional aspect of love, the friendliness, the benevolence. Of course, there's love that is born of attachment. This is still love. Love has so many flavors. there's divine love, there's romantic love, there's familial love, so many different kinds of love, but they're all essentially love. And that's the really important thing. At the core, loving kindness is love. So maybe someone will say, no, it's just friendliness, but even friendliness, in my experience and understanding of it, is coming from a place of love and really from the heart.
Mm-hmm.
These are, yeah, continue.
I was gonna say, and like going into the approach of the practice is knowing that things will become more, like you said, unconditional. That when you start to do the practices, you start to really, these things that blocked you from loving a person with a different view, a person that you may dislike, people that you just don't care about, and just like random people, you start to, these barriers start to fall, and there's that real connection, which is, as a human, is probably the most important thing you can do, because again, we all want peace, we all want calmness, we all want happiness with relationships, with even our interaction with the world. In the practice that I'll be showing everyone later, the practice we will be showing them later, one of them is equanimity, loving the condition, the way things are in the universe, or the way things are in reality. A lot of us, like, we we don't appreciate or love the way the conditions are, which makes sense. Don't get me wrong, it makes sense. There's both negatives and positives to this life. But eventually, in the practice, those ideas of positive and negatives, they're just actions, lovable actions, which is that's karma. Karma just means action. Humans sort of put on this idea of positive and negative spin to it, right? And there's truth to it, don't get me wrong, but at a certain point, you see the way the universe works just purely out of love. And so I think it's a good understanding to everyone watching this, that when you start to do the practice and reflect on your own life, how much do you neglect or fight back or run from relationships internally and externally, whether even the way the universe works. You may not like certain things about your life, and we understand that. And these are the conditions that are what it is. But there's a reason, and having love in those moments is probably the best thing you can do. It'll allow you to take the right moves. It'll allow you to flow much easily rather than harsh, which is what I got from love and kindness. I don't know about you, Ryan, but I know for me, like it gave me this a little bit more softness to my actions, and to, if any, like, situations that happened in my life, it was less harsh, less forceful. It was more like, okay, it's time to be gentle because this part of my life needs love right now.
Yeah, I think for me, like I've mentioned before, Awaken is very much so a gem. Like, imagine a diamond. And diamond has been cut in many ways, or the diamond is cut. It's perfect in of itself, but it has many facets. And even though those facets appear the same, they're not actually the same. Different facets of the same gem. So you could have different flavors of awakening, an awakening that is characterized by particular qualities. So one person can have very much a awakening that is characterized by emptiness, or by the sense that everything is illusory. Another could have the kind of awakening that is characterized by everything being love. having the sense that everything is one body or one mind, even one heart, everything all form as the radiance of unfathomable is actually love itself. So when you look at the gem of awakening from one angle, the other angles can seem subordinated or it can seem like they're lower, and that may be the case. I don't know really what's higher and what's lower, but I can say that the everything is love is definitely one of the facets. It's one of the very principal facets of the gem of awakening and of enlightenment. What loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity open up? They open up the heart aspect of awakening and into the discovery of the realization of what some teachers call the presence as love or Buddha nature as love, this deeper nature, even emptiness as love, and the union of emptiness and compassion. We hear that a lot in them. So this is a natural, a non-generated loving kindness or a non-generated benevolence, a non-generated compassion that has been discovered and is a part of the fabric of one's experience and one's reality as a bodhisattva or as a realized being or or even as a person on the way to that realization. So this of the heart practices. It's oftentimes presented as a way to heal ourselves, and it can definitely provide a lot of healing, but it is actually a doorway to awakening. It is actually a door to enlightenment. It's not just, it's a lot like when you're sharing this loving kindness to all beings, a lot more is happening than what you think is happening. You may just think that this is just an intention, it doesn't do anything, but you have no idea how much purification is actually happening and how important even one moment of heart opening is. The same way with presence and emptiness. One moment of pure presence, one moment of emptiness is extremely important, extremely because it can lay the foundation and the groundwork for a lived awakening that is characterized by that. You know, imagine a lived awakening that is characterized by the heart.
No, you make a good point, because I think I've said this in the first episode where, one of the first reasons why I even started meditating was to heal trauma, heal the pain, and I sort of said this even in my class recently at the Wild Plum last Saturday, which was, we all have goals for our meditation practice. We all have the reasons why we started. Those aren't wrong. And for me, one of them was to heal those traumas. At a certain point, naturally, those things start to fall. Like there's no goal anymore. And it's not because it's not meant to be one of those ideas of like, oh yeah, I'm letting the universe take control. It's not like that. It's not very, what's the word for it? It's not just being,
Jesus, take the wheel.
yeah, and I mean, those trust me, there's truth to it, but it's not like the
There
way
is.
it's not the way people think it is. But in my experience, the goals drift away, and then the real healings arise. So because everyone has an idea of what it looks like, everyone has a projection of like, oh, I want to heal. What does that look like? Oh, Ricardo's like this. He's like this. He has this aspect. He's more confident. He works better in society. There's no pain. That's all just a projection. There's nothing real to it. I don't know what there's no. I don't know what healing looks like. And the approach to love and kindness, it does do that as a byproduct, right? And it's just like you were saying, it's just a natural byproduct. But one of the end results of it is awakening, is this new point of experiencing life. But it's the goal isn't to like heal. It's just it's an aspect to it.
Yeah, this isn't cognitive behavioral therapy, you know.
Yes.
It's
And yep,
or
yep.
any of the, phobia buster from NLP. This is not this is not what that is. Those are all very profound methodologies, and I recommend them for things that really need serious addressing. But loving kindness, like you said, the heart practices are a way to experience and tap into the inherent perfection as well. So
Mm.
in Theravada, there's very much the sense that uh, all existence is characterized by suffering, by impermanence, and by selflessness, right? And you're like, how do you have inherent perfection in suffering, impermanence, and this? Well, when we look at the Mahayana teachings and the Vajrayana teachings, the notion and the teaching, the truth that all phenomena is the Buddha nature, that's where the inherent perfection lies in.
Mm.
The thing about spirituality in general is that, or spiritual work in general, is that there's always another journey. There's always more healing. There's always another spirit to release. There's always another ascension to ascension. There's always in the evolution. There's always, always, always a goal. And the beauty of the inherent teachings and the perfection of wisdom teachings and many of these immediate type approaches is to just recognize that is everything is the Buddha nature, everything is divinity, whatever we want to call it. Everything is the unfathomable reality. The practices up that dimension of immediacy when it comes to love as an aspect of that perfection. There's an emptiness aspect, there's a love aspect, clarity aspect. There are many aspects to the gem, but love is also inherently perfect. It's the gem of awakening, and that's really the function of the heart practices for me. Ricardo and I, we went through years of a very heavy-handed approach to meditation and to awakening, and it's so radically different from how we teach it now. I mean, it's almost unrecognizable from how we taught it 7 years ago, how we taught it 5 years ago, to how we teach it now.
God, that makes me want
You
to
know,
cry.
before we were putting people in front of us and we're like, you got to work hard. You got to meditate like 3 hours a day. And we're just like shooting discouragement in people's faces, just showering them in discouragement and a impossible goal. And now we teach very much that the heart is here, the mind is here, the Buddha nature is here. This is it. There's more than this. Maybe there is a nirvana as a dimension, but nonetheless, notice reality as it is. Open the heart and take your practice from there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a much more natural and a much better approach to the whole spiritual journey.
It's true. And kind of like going into the actual practice of it, of love and kindness, there's again there's several approaches. The one that I practice and I teach, what I know, it's a Theravadan, by a Theravadan sect. I don't know like which one though. I think Ryan, you know.
The retreat that we did is the commentary side.
Mm-hmm.
So using the sense of inherent good in the object and using that as the object of loving kindness, and when you're doing that, the kindness is like self-generated, because you're really just seeing and feeling the goodness in the other person. And that's one side, and that's the approach that Ricardo and I have the most experience with, because we did a 7-day retreat of that and have
Mm-hmm.
taught that very frequently. But there's also a approach to that practice that focuses more on boundlessness. It's in every direction. So
And so yeah, in that way, again, I think in the I think most sects, I think that, yeah, it's called Brahma Viharas. Every sect has just a different version of it, but they're all the same aspects: love and kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, or loving another person's blessings, or loving another person's happiness, and then equanimity. And so, again, the one that we practice is somewhat self-generated because you're feeling either a person's happiness or a person's suffering, a person's happiness, a person's, or just the conditions, the way things are, in a loving way. It's very much self-generated. It's all, but for me, it almost feels like it's always been there. You know, that is, it was always there. There was, it's there's nothing to generate. It's just like the uncovering of it. Everything that you block, or everything that blocked you and you've blocked from actually recognizing the love, that starts to fall apart. In the beginning, you self-generate it, and then it becomes automatic. It's like you can just go into it, and after,
Yeah,
in the
you give
automatic,
rise to it.
yep. And in that state, it's almost like, wow, it's you. There's a reason why it's called realization. There's a reason why it's called recognition, because you, in all these ways, you start to recognize and realize the truth. That's why it's called Dharma, and the truth is of love. Oh wow, it's always been there, or it's just or some sort of insight. So, and I know, like, you can speak a little bit more about the boundlessness, because you read that recently, or we're practicing that.
Well, the boundlessness, like the radiance aspect of loving, it's always done at the end of meditation, but done for a few minutes. So unless you've really dived into an entire meditation that was emphasizing this radiance of loving kindness and boundlessness, you may not have the exact feel for it, as opposed to sensing the heart of another person or the heart of yourself or a being. We can start with the initial instructions. So we start the meditation, whatever position that we're doing. And if we're doing a full loving kindness meditation, usually we start with our as the object of lovingness. So how we would do that is, and this is so useful for loving kindness and just for all meditation in general, to smile from the beginning, sit until that smile. You have that smile, you automatically feel a little bit of happiness. You just smile from mouth, and you recognize, you really sense the is that is inherent in you. You feel the heart center. You have the loving intentions for yourself. May I be safe. May I be happy. Be healthy. May I be free. May I awaken. And this is what we do at the beginning of a loving kindness. If short on time and we just want to get to the radiant, but generally speaking, we start with ourselves, actually feeling that loving kindness for ourselves, and the loving kindness begins to finally grow through the nurturing of the intentions and through feeling the heart, having mindfulness of that loving kindness. Then radiate it to the body, rest of the body, so that the body is now saturated. Imagine the body being like one big loving smile. Intentions again. May I be happy. May I be healthy. And we do that until it's stable, and then we begin to radiate it.
So yeah, and in that approach, obviously you can see it's a lot more different. And I my preference is doing that if I do any sort of mindfulness or shamatic practice or concentration practice, I'll practice that at the end. Boundlessness, spreading love everywhere to all things. Obviously, it's dependent.
Yeah,
But
I just described the boundlessness, like the beginning of the boundlessness practice.
mhm.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I don't know what else to talk about. I think we hit kind of like most of the things that we needed to cover with loving kindness.
Definitely. I'll give a few final points on loving kindness using one object, and we'll end it at 35. So let's say I'm taking Ricardo as the meditation object, as the object of loving, which is actually one of the objects. One of the objects is spiritual friend or the benevolent person. So this is a person that's close to you, that you don't have negative feelings towards. Like you just think of that person and there's just good feelings that come up. So it could be a good friend, spiritual teacher. Um, if it's a family member, as long as there's no animosity that comes up with them, then it's okay. Okay. But generally, so there's two approaches. You could see this person in front of you, or you could see this person and their face within your heart, and have them here, have them in them energy, have them in the mindfulness. I mean, excuse me, have them in the loving kindness that's already rolling from using yourself as the object, and then wishing them for them that they be safe, that they be happy, that they be healthy, be free, that they awaken, and having the intention that that is being sent to them. And by sending it to them, we're now getting out of now extending beyond ourselves. The heart has now extended beyond this personal identity or the personality, and is now embracing another person. It's now connecting with another. So in some retreats, this is the principal object. Actually meditate on the spiritual friend from the moment you get up, while you're eating, while you're sitting, while you're laying down, while you're going for a walk. The whole time you're seeing your
While going to the
spiritual friend.
bathroom,
While going to the bathroom, you see the face of your spiritual friend smiling, or his body or her body, and you're sending them loving kindness. And you just have, it could even be wordless. It can be a wordless intention, but it's the sending of loving kindness, the radiating of loving kindness, enveloping that person within that. And loving kindness really becomes powerful. The mind and the entirety of action is absorbed in that. That's how it leads to jhana. That's how it leads to samadhi. That's why it's practiced on retreats. You're doing it from the moment you get up until the moment you fall asleep. So, surprised. I mean, I had a talk with Tina Rasmussen about this. She did her year-long retreat. Her two parents had already passed away, I believe. I could be wrong, but she said that she used both of her parents as the object of loveness on her year-long retreat. And I was like, and what happened? And she said, yeah. And so I did the Brahma Viharas, each of the Brahma Viharas, with the parent as object up until the fourth jhana. So I was like, so you're telling me you're entering samadhi using your parents, using loving kindness with your parents? And she's like, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So that's very powerful. The spiritual friend can be, you can take a as an object or any person, but if you were consistent with it enough, and if you were doing it on retreat, she said you could enter when you're in jhana, the mind does not come off of the meditation object. I mean, at all, and for hours. Like there's a complete absorption into that state. And Ajahn Brahm, he described this once, where he was chanting the loving kindness sutta, and it was so beautiful, the words he used, chanting the loving kindness sutta, and then he said, and he was just drenched in loving kindness, saturated in loving kindness, and then the beautiful golden nimitta, which is a reflection of the mind, this golden mental image that is very real, very tangible, appeared, and then he just vanished into it. That's samadhi. The words drenched in loving kindness, saturated in loving kindness. That's really what we're going with this practice. It's a very beautiful way into extremely powerful, purifying states of being.
I just don't have words. That was awesome. And I think on a closing note of all this is don't be afraid to practice it. Don't think of it as this purely this lovey-dovey thing that, you know, all like hippies say, or just don't have judgment behind it. Don't, because it's just as important as your mindfulness practice. It's just as equivalent, just because you still have stuff to deal with. You're still, if you're not a monk, you're still a human. You still have to deal with the emotions of life. I think that's another thing that people don't understand is you as a human, even as much as you do your mindfulness practices, you're still dealing with emotions. How much easier to sort of overcome those limitations if you practice loving kindness. Mindful, like we said in the first episode, how mindfulness can kind of, it's not, mindfulness can sometimes make you see it but not deal with it. You get an emptiness, in an emptiness state. Oh, I see these traumas. I know the nature of it. Okay, that's awesome. But have you dealt with it? Have you felt love for it? And so don't ignore this practice. Don't negate it, because it's a very, very important practice that will actually accelerate the more advanced practitioners that have only practiced the shamatas, or just more mindfulness based practices, and not the generating or the invoking of love and kindness.
We got and I actually do want to take this
Go for it.
Paul. What if you can't love yourself in the meditation? This is a common
Mm-hmm.
The people initially have difficulty having loving kindness for themselves. So I think the best way to deal with this is to still develop the heart energy with objects. So with another person, with an external being, really initially get the loving kindness going at first and become familiar and the heart energy arising. And then switching and direct kindness at ourselves. And whatever comes up, like if it's animosity, or if it's just the feeling of nothingness, or the feeling of emptiness, or even if there's pain or disgust and resistance there, to actually place that the loving kindness, and to have loving kindness towards that. So of course, if that's possible, right, that may not be possible for some people. They may feel that immediately once they direct it at themselves, it's just the source gets cut off. And I think at that point, a person just has to sit feeling the heart center. Start the meditation, launch, have the intention. In Buddhism is called adhitthana, or a resolution. Have the resolution, may I experience loving kindness, let it go, and just feel the heart and sit, feeling your chest, and just observe. And eventually, adhitthana, that resolution will sprout, and loving kindness can begin to arise. But there may be a lot that needs to be sat through first. A person may need to cry. A person may need to feel the resistance. A person may need to feel the animosity they have towards themselves before they can feel that for themselves. So, and that could be a pretty, that could be a lot of territory. So you need to work. A person might need to work with a teacher specifically, go through that before they can really begin to have that loving kindness arise for themselves, because there's so much trauma or so much self-hatred that's in the way. Yeah.
Yeah, and for some people as kids, they didn't even know they were introduced to love even as a child. You know, maybe they had a bad relationships with their families and or whatever the circumstances was that that side to them doesn't quite isn't there. And so like you were saying, Ryan, I agree with all of that. Like it it's about being patient, really being patient with yourselves. Like don't for some people they may feel like, oh man, I can't feel it. This sucks. Like I'm not generating love. Is there something wrong with my practice? No, it's just for some. Think of it like this: if you're growing a garden, you have some of the flowers grow faster than the other, but they're still the same. They're still growing to become what they need to become, and that's how practice is. For some, they can generate love much more easily. Others take some time, put more water, give it more sun, pay attention, and those are going to take, like you were saying, Ryan, time when you're whether that's seeing traumas or seeing the despair and seeing these things. I know for me, it took a long time to really generate love and kindness. For me, it took like a year and a half, maybe two, like really focusing on the practice. And I was willing to, I'm a little bit gun ho when it comes to this, but I always had the resolution and the intent to go as deep as possible to the point where I even said, I remember sitting down one time and saying, I want to see that boy, the child that had trauma, the child that wanted to kill himself. I want to see and because I want to spread love and kindness to that part. And people may not understand those. Every picture all the negative sides to you. Those are the aspects that need love, probably even more that we don't sense. We negate them. We're like, oh no, I don't want to. I don't want to pay attention to those things. You need to. Those are the aspects to send love to, and be fine with it. It's okay. That's the thing. It's literally okay. And so when I had that resolution, when I said that one day, just let me see that boy. I was able to see the boy, the little child who was just like full of this depression and sadness. And I was able to, it was such an interesting experience, just like to give a compassionate love and forgive and knowing that it's okay. It's okay to come out to that it's not the same anymore. You don't need to be in pain. And things change. That takes for me it took time, it took effort. Mostly it took patience because it's not just going to go like that.
Paul had another good question. Can you try a different Brahma Vihara first, like awareness of suffering, if they can't access the self-loving kindness? So, like I said in the beginning of this talk, loving kindness and the Brahma Viharas are taught differently depending on where you go to learn them. So, like in three settings, they wouldn't tell you to do that. They would say to just stick with the loving kindness on the spiritual friend and yourself until and that nut breaks or it begins to arise, like the rock finally cracks and the loving kindness just begins to spew forth, right? But I think when it comes to our at home practice and to our understanding and exploration of this, I think it's fine to their Brahma Vihara for outside of the retreat context, because in a way it's up to our discretion what we're going to do with our. And I think if tapping into suffering is a way for compassion, and that's still getting the heart activated. And if you're looking at the suffering of another person and you to have compassion for that, then you can look at your own suffering and begin to have compassion, and boom, there you go. You have the doorway to loving kindness right there. You're beginning to have love for yourself, but love for the suffering initially.
Mm.
So great point,
Yeah,
Paul.
yeah. Don't be afraid to explore all the other aspects of love of the Brahma Viharas. Like Ryan was saying, just anytime you feel that love, go stick with it. You don't need to stick with just metta, and you can do karuna or compassion, do equanimity, and then you can always switch it over to love and kindness. Because I think before it was like the way I was taught was you do love and kindness, you generate that, and then you introduce it to karuna. You do love and kindness, you introduce, then you switch it over to sympathetic joy, then to, it's always the foundation is love and kindness.
Yep.
But it's very, it's almost better depending on the practitioner to feel each aspect, and whichever aspect that generates that first, stick with it, and
Yeah.
then switch it over.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just gain stability and the samadhi in whatever door is most open for you. I'd say that's really good advice. All right. This was a wonderful discussion. So thanks for asking questions, Paul, and thank you everyone for listening. We'll be back here again next Monday, p.m. Pacific, and it'll probably be another discussion about loving kindness or divine love or something related to the Brahma Viharas, unless new particular topic that comes up. But the heart practices are very vast, and there's so many different kinds of them. There's Tonglen. That's a really big practice where you're breathing in, you're taking in the suffering, and then generating compassion out of it. So there's a lot in the whole loving kindness umbrella of practices, and yeah, we'll be discussing that as we move along. So thank you everyone for watching, and see all of you next week.